So we were diving at Madeira, and it did not go quite as planned. Now this is just my point of view, and I try to explain what we went through. I also give my best guess of what I think the guide probably was thinking. So first of all, the dive briefing was a little sketchy, so to speak. We were supposed to go down to 25 meters or 82 feet one by one and wait for the others. Once we were all down, we would start the dive. The guide asked us to inform him when we were at 100 bars so he could plan the rest of the dive. We were supposed to be at the anchor when the first diver hits the 70 bars, so we would have enough gas for the ascend, safety stop, and have the 50 bars reserve when we surface. After the briefing, me and my dive buddy started to discuss about the diving plan. I was little worried about the gas and the depth, since we had 12 liters 200 bars tanks with 32% nitrox. The first diver to ascend would use something like 90 liters of gas every minute down there, so I just hoped there would not be big gap between the first and the last diver. But before we could even get our gear on, we saw the rest of the group jump in the water and was ready to go. So we didn't have time to make proper diving plan and kinda decided to follow the guide. And off we went. We got to the diving site and jumped into the water. They said we should hold on to the ropes and descend by holding the line, since there was some current at the time. The group was 6 divers and 2 guides, and I was the first one to descend. I went straight to the bottom, and my dive buddy followed right after. Soon after came the diving guide and the next divers. It was about 2 minutes into the dive when I started to record. You can see the dive time on the bottom of the screen. This is where the video starts, and sorry for the BCD controller hanging into the view all the time. Here you can see the diving guide and 2 of the other divers. Quite soon the guide realized something was wrong with the last pair and went back up. I guess it was somewhere in the first 10 meters, since it's the worst for the ears. I decided to make the most of my time down there and looked around while they were dealing with the ears. I also thought that this was just what I was afraid of. I'll fast forward most of the dive, since there was not that much to see. Here we saw some nice fish going by while we were waiting, and quite quickly after this, you can see me asking my dive buddy what's going on. I guess the second guide saw that, since she let me know that the last pair was having some problems with their ears, and so we kept waiting. Now finally, I think we are going to start the dive after about 10 minutes of waiting. At this point, I knew we had to skip a lot of the planned dive, since we've already lost about 70 to 80 bars. The dive site itself was nice, although they kept telling us that the visibility was bad. We mostly dive in Finland, So for us, the visibility was 5 to 10 times better than we are used to, and at least here we could see some fish. Soon after we started to move, the guide asked about the gas, and at that time I remember having 130 bars. Here my dive buddy tells me and the guide that she's at 100 bars. The dive guide gives okay sign, and we kept moving on. Here I try to lure the bigger fish to come closer with my light. Here was some current for the first time, and I had to work a little to go forward. I supposed it was same for the rest of the group. At this point, my dive buddy let the guide know that she had 50 bars left. I actually had to go to next to her and checked her gauge. She really was at 50 bars. The guide responded with okay sign and kept going. Now I started to get a little worried, since her gas was not going to be enough for the both of us to make safe ascend in case something happens to my gear. I guess people don't remember that the reserve is for your dive buddy. Well, soon after this, the guide went back to the others and checked their pressures. I thought that since it was late start, the guide wanted to give us as much dive time as possible, and that's why we went little lower than usually before we started to ascend. But to my surprise, we didn't start the ascend, but kept going. We were around 17 meters or 56 feet of depth. The guide kept showing something in the rocks, but I really couldn't focus on the marine life anymore. We were about to run out of gas. At this point, my dive buddy let me know that she's at 30 bars and I decided to end the dive. It's getting too dangerous. She barely have enough gas to make safe ascend by herself. I use my dive light to get the guide's attention and let him know my dive buddy is at 30 bars and we are going up. The guide asks us to follow, and at the same time tries to get the attention of the other guide. Not sure why we still keep moving at the depth of 17 meters or 56 feet, but we kept following him. Soon the guide stops again and tries to get the other guide to come closer. He seemed little stressed, but kept his calm and gives the okay sign to my dive buddy. Now I'll come back to this point later and tell what I think was happening, but for now, I'll tell it like I experienced at the time. For some reason, the guide separated me from my dive buddy and paired her with the other guide. He also asked the other guide to give her octo to my dive buddy. I was confused. In my mind, there was no need for that. We just needed to go up. My dive buddy had 30 bars, and that should be enough for safe ascend and safety stop. We just wouldn't make it to the boat. Now my dive buddy had some trouble with the other guide's octo. They figured it out quickly, but it made the situation more stressful. The rest of the group continued the dive, and I really didn't know what was going on. I decided to start my ascend, although the main guide asked us to follow. Maybe he didn't realize that most of us were almost out of gas. I kept looking up to see if my dive buddy is okay, and at the same time I tried to look which way to go. I think there was some miscommunication on where to go between my dive buddy and the other guide, since they went to the surface without the safety stop. So I keep looking down to see which way the rest of the group is going while ascending. The guide keeps showing some hand signs, but he's too far away for me to see them. At this point, I just use my light to let him know I'm okay. Here you can see that one other member of the group also leaves the group and starts to ascending. I didn't see that when diving, since I was busy looking up and down. So here I was alone in Atlantic doing my safety and wondering about those currents they were talking about when we jumped from the boat. Gladly, I saw someone in the distance and started to move towards him. Got a little closer and saw that he was at the anchor and started his safety stop. I asked about his pressure, and he responded with 30 bars, and he just started his safety stop. I guess his dive buddy just continued the dive and left him to do the safety by himself. At this point, my dive buddy and the other guide came down on the line to make their own safety stop. Although I think it is not advised, they still decided to do so. You can see my dive buddy hanging on the rope, being very buoyant. She had very little gas left and thought that if something fails, she could always let go and go to the surface. I finished my safety stop and got onto the boat. After the dive, I had 25 bars left. My dive buddy had 0 bars. The guy who did the safety with me had 15 bars, and one of the divers who had problems with their ears and came down last had 40 bars. I had a talk with the guy on the boat and others at the dive center. They were all very understanding and agreed that this didn't went as it's supposed. I had no chance to speak with main guide. But now, let's go back to the dive. Here we are again, where the main guide paired my dive buddy with the other guide. I guess they knew we are quite close to the boat, and his plan was for my dive buddy to use the spare gas from the other guide until we are at the boat. After that, she could use her own gas to ascend safely. That's also why I guess there was some miscommunication between my dive buddy and the other guide. The other guide wanted to continue the dive, or keep going towards the boat. But we are taught that in these kind of situations you are supposed to stop the dive and head for the surface, but not to skip the safety stop. That is probably the reason they missed it. Well, at least that is my best guess. There was many things that went wrong in this dive. Some made by me and my dive buddy, some made by the guide, but the biggest one was that we didn't follow one of the main rules. Plan your dive and dive your plan.